If you're a pop culture junkie who loves TV, film, music, comedy, and other really important stuff, then you've come to the right place. Get ready and settle in for Classic Conversations, the best pop culture interviews in the world. That's right, we circled the globe so you don't have to. If you're ready to be the king of the water cooler, then you're ready for Classic Conversations with your host, Jeff Dwoskin.
All right, Gary, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. You get the show going each and every week, and this week was no exception. Welcome, everybody, to episode 323 of Classic Conversations. As always, I am your host, Jeff Dwoskin. Great to have you back for what's sure to be an out-of-this-world episode. We are diving deep into the documentary, A Disturbance in the Force, how the Star Wars Holiday Special got made, with none other than its creator, Jeremy Coon. He was one of the directors and producers of this amazing documentary. We're diving deep into that. You may also recognize Jeremy's name as an executive producer of Napoleon Dynamite, 2004's Napoleon Dynamite, celebrating 20 years. Huge celebration, 2 decades of Napoleon Dynamite. And we're talking that. We're talking A Disturbance in the Force, and that's coming up in just a few seconds. And in these few seconds, Amy Dolenz was here last week talking about all her classic TV and film roles from the 80s. She was out of control. Check that out. But right now, check out my conversation with Jeremy Coon. We're celebrating 20 years of Napoleon Dynamite. We're diving deep into the amazing documentary, A Disturbance in the Force. And that's coming up right now. All right, everyone, I'm excited to introduce my next guest, producer, director, such amazing classics as Raiders, the story of the greatest fan film ever made, Napoleon Dynamite, and most recently, my new favorite documentary, A Disturbance in the Force, the making of the Star Wars Holiday Special. Welcome to the show, Jeremy Coon. Hey.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, I know I've been stalking you, so I appreciate you finding time.
I appreciate the persistence. Glad it worked out.
You know, there's certain things. Like recently I talked to Ann Moses, and she was the editor of Tiger Beat in the early 70s. And that was cool because every time I talked to like a teen idol, I'd always look up Tiger Beat headlines. And, you know, so when I finally got to talk to someone who worked at Tiger Beat, that was pretty awesome. So I've had Bruce Vilanch on the show and Lenny Rips. And of course, in both of those interviews, we talked about Star Wars Holiday Special, which they were writers on and prominently featured in your documentary. So when I saw you made a documentary, that's why I've been like, oh, I got to talk to Jeremy. I've got to talk to Jeremy. So.
Yeah, and Bruce and Lenny are great. Like, there's the type of people where you just put the camera on them and just let them talk. Like, you don't even have to try very hard.
Yeah, they both have kind of their own little humorous style.
Yeah.
And they're super fun to talk to. Never a shortage of stories with either of those folks. And you splice them into the holiday special really well because they each had like a very different role in it. And I think even at different times.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of overlap, but it was kind of like, like Lenny was done more or less, like he never visited set. And Bruce was on set the whole time, more or less.
So what is your fascination with creating and making and cult classics, right? I mean, 20 years now for Napoleon Dynamite. And so you must be celebrating that.
Yeah. So Sundance is fortunate enough we're going to do a couple of 20th anniversary screenings. One of them we're bringing some people from the, help make it, a little bit of cast members and just doing, it's going to be fun. It's actually, for those that are interested, it's the 4K restoration of the movie. So I'm kind of curious to see how much better it looks. I'm not sure it'll look that much better because the film stock we used was so grainy because that's kind of all we could afford at the time. But yeah, it's crazy that it's been that long. 20 years is a long time.
Do you have any idea when you were making this movie that it was going to become like that it would resonate? Like I have, among a million other people, vote for Pedro's shirt, crazy wig, went as Napoleon Dynamite for Halloween one of my years. You know what I mean? So I think everyone does that.
That's not to age you, but how old were you when you saw it, when it came out, or when you first saw it?
I don't think I saw it. It's interesting. My relationship with Napoleon Dynamite is interesting. Like I didn't see it till I think much later. And the first time I watched it, everyone was like, this is the funniest, greatest movie ever. I can't believe you haven't seen it. I'm like, I haven't seen it. So we sat down, my wife and I sat down and watched it. And I remember saying to the people who told us to watch it, I'm like, I don't get it. I don't get it. And and they're like, no, 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 no. That's why it's so amazing. And then we rewatched it and I was like, oh my God, this is hilarious. It hit, you know what I mean? The first time I watched it.
It's so funny. That's typically what we hear is a lot of people are like, man, I saw it and I did not get it. I hated it. And then somehow someone talked me into watching it again, then I loved it. Which I've always found, I don't think I've ever revisited a movie that I have not liked ever, really, and then liked it. That doesn't happen very often.
Well, it is. And then it becomes one of those movies where just start watching it from wherever you happen to stumble upon it, if you stumble upon it.
Yeah, like when we made it, we had no clue. Like I felt we were like, I was 24 at the time, and so it was like Jared and the people we're making it with. We're all kind of like our early mid-20s, first thing we've done. And I felt we were making a movie for us that we knew that like our demographic would like. I remember during that first Sundance, they were doing high school screenings of the movie. And I was totally worried because I'm just like, there's no way a high school crowd's going to find this funny. It's like too close to, like, it's you have some perspective on high school. I don't know if this is funny when you're in high school. And we did like a screening for like 1,000 high school students, and like the room just like blew up. And it kind of opened this whole new thing where it's like, oh, this is a movie that appeals to broader than just us. I mean, it's crazy when we do screenings and like we have people who are now 8 years old, you know, that were not even remotely born when the film came out, and like they're digging in on it. So, I mean, for me, the relationship I had with, I think a lot of people have is like when Ferris Bueller's Day Off came out, I was way too young to probably really appreciate it. But like, that's a film that there's always going to be high school kids that are experiencing that, even if times change. I think that's kind of hopefully what we tapped into.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing because you made it with no money. It made a ton of money. Like when you think like John Heder, the rumor like he made like $1,000 or something. Like,
yeah, I mean that's not entirely true. He was paid scale, which I think was like $2,000. But I mean, he's got back end on the film. It also like launched his career. It led to other projects. I mean, the distributor paid him to kind of do press. I mean, so it's like he didn't make millions. Like he didn't make as much money for how much attention he got, but he did not get $1,000. He got more than $1,000.
Yeah, I understand the tangible benefit. It's just funny.
I've seen that in multiple theaters where it's like the trivia thing, like how much was John Heder paid for Napoleon Dynamite? And it's like $1,000. And I'm like, I don't know where anyone gets that. I don't know where.
You know, some of these things, they just kind of, and John Grease is like big in the White Lotus, even just of recently. So, which was
yeah, I was texting him last night. I was just like, he's just one of those people where we cast him. So Uncle Rico, we were trying to get like a star for. And like there was a period of, oddly enough, we were looking at like Jack Black, but it was just completely unrealistic at the time. We were leaving to go to Idaho like the next day or two, and we had to have someone cast for Uncle Rico. And like the casting director showed us like his reel, and we're like, he's great, just cast him. We'll see him in Idaho. So like he didn't audition. We didn't meet him until we were in Idaho to have him be the character. But he's just one of those people that's always fun to have on set, be around. Like he's just a joy.
Yeah, I can't imagine anyone else being more perfect than he was. The scene where he's reminiscing about the football, playing football, so good.
He has a funny story. When the film came out, so like Randy Jackson from like American Idol was like a huge star at the time, and like he knew John, and he was at some dinner, and Randy Jackson was just going off on like how great Napoleon Dynamite was, going off and not realizing that John played Uncle Rico because the wig made him look so different. And then find out that his friend is like, he's like, I'm in that. He's like, well, what part did you play? It's like, I'm Uncle Rico. Like, what do you
That's funny. That's really funny. I mean, usually you hear that when there's prosthetics involved, maybe.
Yeah. Well, oddly enough, the wig really does kind of transform the way he appears, because he's bald, fully bald, you know, most of the time. And he just looks completely different.
That is so funny. Yeah, there's just so many great things about Napoleon Dynamite. It's one of those movies you almost like have to rewatch. The dancing scene. I mean, it's like this is so much. I just love it. And his voice.
Yeah. So to answer your question, we did not think it was going to be as successful as it was. And I'm still amazed the fact 20 years later that it still has this lasting power. Like I had this theory that like if films last 10 years, they're going to last forever. And I kind of feel we've broken out from that, because a lot of films after like 5 years, you kind of just forget about. It's just the life cycle of how many, like there's so much product out there. It's hard to break out.
Yeah. Napoleon Dynamite is definitely one of those movies that I think every generation, because it was my mother-in-law that was, when I was talking about it, it was my mother-in-law. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. It was my stepmom who was like telling me about it. So I was like, I think it's transcended. It's there forever. So you got that one. What was, with the Star Wars holiday special, what's your background just in that in general? Like everyone who's a fan of Star Wars kind of just has the background, meaning like were you aware of it? Had you seen it? Did you just used to scope it out on YouTube? Like what
Yeah,
was?
I mean, I don't remember not being a Star Wars fan. I was born in '79, so it's the year after the special. But like the first toys I remember playing with were Star Wars figuring, like action figures, because that's what my brothers had. And like the first movie I ever seen in the theaters, Return of the Jedi, when I was about 4. So I'm not obsessive to the point where I dress up all the time, but I mean, I know the world. So, I mean, I kind of heard rumors about the holiday special, but it's kind of like the Raiders tape when I did that. It's just like people talk about it, but it was hard to find at the time. And I wasn't quite certain if it was real, but like a friend gave me a copy of the holiday special on DVD in like 2002. I watched maybe 15, 20 minutes. And I wasn't convinced that it was real at that point. I was kind of like, this feels like it's a joke. Like someone has managed to take like elements of Star Wars and mixed it in with maybe some variety stuff and made it look like it was a real TV special. But like, I was like, I can't imagine this actually aired. And then just, it didn't really think about it for, after that. I kept the DVD, but never finished it. And then I felt around the, like YouTube comes out and like this holiday special is readily available because then it's just not on bootlegs. And especially in, like I say, for some reason, there's an inflection point around 2010 where it becomes much less underground and more of this like pop culture reference where like people always like to reference it. Like, Mark Hamill's doing tweets about it. It's this kind of like fun thing to talk about. And that's what really appealed to. One, I was interested in that aspect of it because it was such a part of like popular culture and like no one really knew, and no one had done like a deep dive on like how this actually happened. Because like in my mind, I was like, there has to be reasons why this was a good idea in '78. And in retrospective, it does not look that good, but like there had to be, like no one went into this knowing it was a bad decision and just kind of figuring out. And when we got in the world of like 70s TV, that's where I was like, oh, this is so much fun. Cause like there's so much bad variety TV that we can show, like, just kind of give a sense of what the time was. That kind of really opened up the film.
Yeah, it's an interesting time, like, right? 1977, Star Wars comes out, the biggest thing ever, right? It just blows everything away. It's interesting because in the documentary, you talk about just the psychology of how they did this groundswell and created fans before the movie even came out to get them interested in Star Wars. And they created such a satiable appetite for Star Wars and everything that they were afraid everyone would fall off the cliff and forget all about them by the time The Empire Strikes Back comes out in 1980. At the time, right, there's no internet, there's no social media, there's nothing really to do it. So somebody comes up with the idea, which brilliant on paper, let's do a holiday special.
I always say this, it's like, it would have been weird for them not to do something like this. The other thing too, it's not like they went cheap on this. Like they paid $1 million, hired the best people that had done TV specials and got the biggest stars they could at the time. And it was just destined never to work. But at the time, it's exactly what you would do to market it because that's how stuff was marketed. Like if you had any notoriety, you did a TV special. Didn't matter if you were a football player and you couldn't sing, dance, or act, they would give you something to do and fill up with stars. Like, and it's just a fun time. I also feel a lot of it at the time is like, who's available? Let's throw them in the special and mix these people up. Like we don't show this, but like Kiss on the Paul Lynde Halloween special, I think it's hilarious because it's just so bizarre to have Kiss in that world performing like normally. But yeah, it would have been fun to been alive at that time just to experience that.
It was interesting because one of the kind of threads or themes is that as bad as the Star Wars holiday special was, this is what 70s variety TV was. So in comparison, it was all bad. And specifically, I love that you showed the Paul Lynde Halloween special because one day I was just kind of flipping through and Am at my Fire Stick said, hey, you should watch this. And I did. I watched the Paul Lynde Halloween special. And like you said, it has Kiss, which is so out of place, but they're rocking. It had Witchy Poo in it and the woman from Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch of the West. And I mean, it's these seven.
Is that actually her or is it someone playing her?
No,
I've never actually looked into it. That's actually, it's so weird. It's like.
Yeah, because they were alive then. You don't think, they were. And so that special in itself is so horrible, but it's so great because it's so bad, right? I mean, there's something to it. And I guess at the time, this must have been enjoyed by people. It's like, you think aliens would land here and they'd have a whole group of people just investigate this.
I mean, to me, to me also is like, you got to understand like your demographic at the time, where it's kind of like the holiday special. If you were between like 5 and 10 when it came out, you thought it was the greatest thing ever, because it was the only time that because back then it's like you have 3 channels, there's no home video other than seeing the movie in a theater. This is all the Star Wars you were going to get. So if you were between 5 and 10, you were ecstatic to see like Han Solo and Chewbacca and like all this other stuff, and you didn't care. Like seeing a dancing, you might have thought sucked, but like you had no alternative. And I kind of feel that's what TV was, where it's like you have 3 options. If you want to watch the Brady Brunch Variety Hour or like Love Boat or whatever, like these are your options, or you can go read or do something else. But I mean, it's just completely foreign to what it's like now, where we have so much content that's so readily available. I mean, it's the opposite problem, where stuff gets lost that you just don't see it.
Yeah, there was a whole TV show starring Julia Roberts, and I was like, what? Yeah, I didn't even know it was out.
Yeah.
How does that get lost? So you're right. It's interesting. So November 17th, 1978, the holiday special airs. Lenny Rips has a funny comment in the documentary. I think he mentioned it when I was talking to him as well, is that they really thought this was going to be their meal ticket. Like this was going to play every
year.
Yeah, it's going to play every year, like every Charlie Brown special. This thing aired one time, which in itself is interesting to think like how popular Star Wars must have been at that time. And I don't think VCRs were that prevalent. At the time, VCRs, if I remember correctly, a good one cost $800. I mean, it was like insane.
It might have been more than that. You had to be very rich to have like a beta or a VHS. So like they were around, but it was definitely not prevalent. I mean, I want to say it might have even cost like $2,000 in 1978 dollars. I mean, it was like buying a car or something. Like it was expensive.
Yeah, it was very costly. So to think that it survived, because that's really the way it survived. Somebody captured it, and then at some point, that person realized they had it at some point, and then started distributing it. I was like you, where, I don't know, 15 or so years ago, a friend of mine gave it to me on DVD, and it was like, I had heard of it, but, and then you watch it. I'm impressed you got through 15 minutes of it.
Yeah, I mean, once you have like the 10 minutes of like Wookiee speak with no sense of what's going on, I'm just like, this is like someone's taken the sound and dubbed this and taken the subtitles out, because like there's no way that this is just going on endlessly. Around that mark is where I tuned out. So it was probably around the 15-minute mark.
Yeah, it was fascinating actually in the documentary where you talked about how they wouldn't use captions, like that there was some like stigma with it or something like that. And I got to say,
America was too dumb to want to read subtitles because they were lazy. I'm like, I don't know how true that. I mean, you also got to think TV at the time too is also like not high quality. It's like 3x4, so it's probably a little bit harder to read subtitles on that. I mean, I think there's some truth to it, but I think the thing is like George was just adamant that he didn't want subtitles for whatever reason.
It's all interesting. So to interrupt, I have to take a quick break. I do want to thank everyone for their support of the sponsors. When you support the sponsors, you're supporting us here at Classic Conversations, and that's how we keep the lights on. For the record, I keep captions on for everything. And we're back. What was sort of the impetus where you're like, all right, let's make a documentary about the Star Wars holiday special? What's the process of making one of these documentaries? You kind of got to storyboard it out, then you go get somebody to help finance it, like sell the idea. You got to get rights to all this stuff too, right?
I don't worry about any of that at the beginning. So it's more kind of like, the reason why I like documentaries is you just kind of explore a little bit and see what's there. So like, to me, the first starting point is like, I think this is interesting. I have questions to which there are not answers readily available. So like, to me, that's like the starting point. If I have that, it's like, oh, well, let's go do some interviews. So like Lenny Rips was one of the first people we interviewed. And it was during his interview where I was like, all right, there's stuff here. If we can go and talk to other people from the production, like he was the one that really, because we went and did like 3 days of interviews. We did like, it was not to sound too morbid, but we kind of hit the people that we were concerned might die, of which none of those people have died, oddly enough. But like they were older and like memories fade and you never know how someone's health's going to be. But we knocked out as many of those out as we could and kind of gave us a base to kind of go on. But the other thing too, like when you're making these, it's kind of like being a journalist to some degree, where it's like you're asking questions, you're doing research and digging into it, and you have an idea of where you think it might go, but you need to be open to things that might surprise you or things that you thought were the case that end up being wrong. To me, that's just part of the documentary process, is just kind of rolling with it. And like, as you do more and more interviews, I mean, I think we interviewed like 50 people. those interviews lead to other interviews, and then you can kind of piece stuff together. I mean, like the first cut was heavily Lenny Rips and Bruce Valanche because they were the ones that had the most core, and we didn't want to have, to the point where it's kind of awkward to have the film be that heavy on them. So we kind of filtered in other people to cover similar topics that made sense. So yeah, I mean, it was ended up being like a 4-year process. COVID came in the middle of it, which kind of derailed it for about a year and a half. I mean, we made this completely independently. And when it comes back to the rights, I mean, we claim fair use on this, and I've gone through it enough on documentaries where, you know, we've had enough commentary and like we didn't push the envelope on any usage. So when the fair use lawyer did his review, the sign off and everything, he only had like 2 small tweaks. So it's always the most nerve-wracking process is like, am I so off? How off base are we compared to, because the lawyer has to basically give the okay to make it okay.
And you're probably in a good spot, right? You're like, what's George Lucas going to do? He doesn't admit that this exists, so he can't claim that you're using his. I'm kidding, but you know what I mean. But
yeah, but I mean, it's been on YouTube for like 15 years. Right, they've never done anything about it. So like, you want to. I mean, part of like this is like you got to incur damages, and it's like, well, it's just out there, and you're not selling. Like, it's not. And to me, that's also what makes it fun. Is like if Disney Plus did like a formal release and put it out, it actually for me would kind of spoil the fun of it. It's like being in on the joke. I kind of like its place. It annoys them a little bit, and they try to ignore it, and that's just. It makes it more enjoyable for all of us fans to kind of poke at it.
I heard the Boba Fett cartoon is on Disney Plus, but
that's on Disney Plus.
But the rest of it is not. And I agree with you 100%. It's as soon as if it was 1,000% mainstream like Disney Plus, then it just becomes like a piece of garbage, not like this special horrible thing that we all love.
Yeah, I really don't love it. It's kind of like I appreciate its uniqueness and like place in history, but like I've had to watch it like 6 times beginning to end, and like every time it's hard. It's like
no, I meant love a little more abstractly than that. Yeah, no,
okay.
I can't watch it either. It's unwatchable. But the amazing thing about the documentary is how you made an amazing documentary about something completely unwatchable, but you made an extremely enjoyable and watchable documentary that incorporates it enough where you're like, oh, okay, you know what? I think I do want to go. I'm going to go check this out. You know what I mean? I'm going to go torture myself, and I'm going to go watch the full Jefferson Airplane video, or I'm going to go watch the whole Diane Carroll soft porn Wookiee scene. I got to find the whole thing, you know, where you just teased it all enough.
I mean, that's probably the impetus for the documentary. I was like, what's the story behind that scene? Because someone thought that was like, we couldn't get into it too much because I couldn't find any audio of it. But like, I'm pretty sure there's an interview that Mitzi Weltz did in print where she said that like we were just screwing with the censors to see what we can get away with. And like no one flagged it, which is shocking because you're just kind of like, it has to be that because like you're doing this kids program of this like softcore erotica porn. It's so weird. It's like so strange.
It's one of the most bizarre things. So, all right. So what I'm getting from your earlier comment is there is a hashtag Rips Valanche cut. We can go all somewhere. Zack Snyder on you and like release the Rips Valanche cut.
No, I mean, their whole interview, I mean, both of their interviews were probably like an hour and a half. And like I said, like, it's great talking to people. Like a lot of these interviews, we just have to like throw out a question and then step back and get out of their way. Like Kevin Smith was that way. Pat Knowles, like all these people are just like, they're professionally funny and all you can do is get in their way. Yeah, but like someone was asking like, why don't we have more extras on the Blu-ray? And I'm like, we don't really have any. I started to put some together and I'm like, everything we like is in the movie. There's not some like, oh, I would have loved to, like every movie I've done, I'm like, oh, I would have loved to have the scene in, but it throws the timing off or it's too like people don't care. At the end of the day, that like everything we thought was interesting is in it. So the stuff we can pull out just felt kind of lame putting it together. Like we're just trying to create extras out of nothing.
All right. I respect that. So what surprised you when you were researching, interviewing, putting this together?
The most surprising thing to me is that, so when I set out in this, I was kind of like, oh, Lucas is such a jerk. He just needs to own this. I was kind of like, I feel like a lot of friends, like a lot of fans are, where it's not necessarily anti-Lucas, but kind of like, come on, man, you're being lame about this. And through the course of making the movie, I have way more empathy for his position, knowing what was going on at the time, where he's like, he's made the most successful movie of all time. He's like 33. He has everything at his disposal, like anything he wants to do, he can do. And he decides to leverage his entire net worth to do Empire, where if Empire doesn't happen, he basically goes bankrupt. And like, that's his priority. And then he has like other stuff going on. And like his like American Graffiti 2 is like a side note. But in the middle of all this, and he's trying to get the merchandising off the ground. In the meantime, someone's like, hey, you should do a holiday special. And he's like, oh, great. It'll help sell toys. And he talks on it for a day and then goes back to Empire. So I'm kind of like, yeah, I mean, what are you going to do in that situation where it's just like you have much bigger fish to fry than what the holiday special is? At the end of the day, I also view, if you do the holiday special, I mean, there's also this weird thing about Star Wars where you have like the films and the TV shows that are all like very sacred. And then you have this like marketing engine where they'll slap Star Wars on everything. And they're kind of like two parallel tracks that go on. And if you do the holiday special more as like on the marketing side as opposed to like a film, it makes more sense. So that's the kind of, I was surprised in looking at it that way, where it's like, yeah, it makes sense why this happened and why they did it. And at the end of the day, I would have to argue it was probably successful in what it set out to do. I mean, while it's not good, 13 million people watched it. The toys were available that first Christmas for the first time. And I can only assume it helped sell more toys going into Christmas.
Yeah. Did you get a feeling for anyone who remembered it at the time? Because at the time, everyone was like, oh, Star Wars. I mean, like, I know in the Goldbergs clip, the boy immediately didn't like it, but I'm sure it was like weird for people. But
if you, as I said, like if you were 5 to 10, like you thought it was while not like amazing, like you really enjoyed it because it's the only Star Wars you're going to get until 1980. You know, if you're 7, that's a long time to wait. You're going to wait 3 years to see something new. But if you were older than 10, you kind of were. Even if you're older than 10, you were clearly kind of like, hey, something's not right here. That's kind of, to me, that's where the cutoff is. Like if you're like 11, 12, 13, you're kind of like, I like that. I mean, I'm happy to be watching this, but like something's off.
There's a disturbance in the force.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. It was funny because like it seemed that Peter Mayhew was the only person that you had a clip of saying that he actually was, I don't know if he said proud, but he didn't have a negative thing to say about.
He was proud of it. We have an audio recording of like an interview he did on the phone in like 98. None of it was like particularly, it was a strange phone call. I'll leave it at that. But he was very like proud of it. And he's like, I mean, it's basically Chewbacca's starring role. Like that's the one thing where it's like, it's all around the Wookiee family and Chewbacca. So, I mean, there's also like this rumor that this was like a test program to then do a Chewbacca TV series. Or like a Wookiee TV series where Chewbacca would kind of come in periodically. I actually don't think that's true. What I think it was, I think someone in the executive was like, hey, we spent all this money on the set. Maybe we could use this for a TV show if it's successful. And I think that's where it stopped. Because once the special came out, there was no sense that they were ever going to revisit it.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Yeah. Although a Wookiee TV series would have been interesting. I don't know.
It would have been. So how did you pick the folks? Like Seth Green, I think that's a good one. How did you get him to be in? I know he works with Lucas on his shows that he does. Yeah.
So Seth was the top of the list of people I wanted to interview that weren't directly like involved in the making of it. And fortunately enough, like our producer Kyle Newman's friends with him, and reached out to him, and Seth was like, "Oh, I'm all in. What do you need?" Like, I love talking about the special, and he was just like an open book. Like he was just an open book. I mean, the other thing about Seth is like, I would say Seth, he's the next best person to interview other than Lucas, because he's like one of the few people who I feel has talked to Lucas at length about this and worked with him. Like a Star Wars Detour show. I mean, I don't know how many years they spent making that, but like he was with Lucas for long periods of time talking and just kind of like hanging out. So like it was really interesting. To me, that's where the more empathy for Lucas came from, is from Seth giving his perspective on how Lucas was reacted to it. Because I feel it's probably the most honest you're going to get. I don't even know if Lucas himself, if we sat down and interviewed him, would be that open or honest about it. So that was really enlightening. But fortunately, we had a connection to Seth and he was willing to do it. But like everyone we reached out to, like no one really said no. Like all the people we reached out to were like, yeah, let's make this happen. I want to support it. I want to be a part of this. And that kind of comes to the kind of fandom I think that Star Wars has, where people enjoy being a part of this and just kind of, it's just fun at the end of the day.
Right. Like Taron Killam, what was his connection?
That was strictly our producer, Kyle Newman's also friends with him. And oddly enough, I was not like, I was kind of like, well, I mean, I like Taron, but like, what's his connection other than being a Star Wars fan? And when he started doing his interview, I was just like, he had so many like funny bits and just takes. And it was just, that kind of goes to the same thing where it's like, if you get interviews with funny people who are professionally funny and give them a topic to riff on, they will inevitably come up with fun stuff. Because that's where I kind of feel with the comedians we pulled in, it was like we needed more humor. Because I mean, Bruce Valanche and Lenny Rips were funny, but like a lot of these people are just kind of older and drier that were actually like making the special. So it was kind of nice to filter in commentary to kind of lighten things up, keep jokes going.
Gilbert Gottfried's last film role?
As far as I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my directing partner, Steve Kozak, works for the Jimmy Kimmel Show, and he had a connection to Gilbert, and we just did that interview remotely. But yeah, he was down for it. I think he was in Florida when we shot it. But like that was like, he was our first star, I would say, where it's just like named, like, hey, we got Gilbert Gottfried.
That's awesome.
But he also did, like, he had a connection where he had done a podcast about the Star Wars Holiday Special, like with Bruce Valanche, and had like talked at length about it for like an hour and a half. So like he had a lot of funny bits, and he was familiar with it. It wasn't just like out of the blue.
Yeah, no, he made sense because his Colossal podcast, he goes very deep into a lot of pop culture. His is one of that's one of the things I miss now that he's gone is new episodes of that podcast, because him and his co-star of that podcast, they go deep. They do their research.
Yeah.
So you can appreciate it because a lot of folks don't.
In his interview, he has like a 5-minute like aristocrats like filthy joke he does on the Star Wars Holiday Special, which if we're gonna do an extra, that would probably be the extra. But it's like it is filthy. Like it is.
Oh, I can imagine. He's known for the other non-Star Wars filthy one. I loved the thread of Donny Osmond. Now, I don't know if this is what you intended, but this is what I took from the Donny Osmond thread, was that in a way, he represented what we would hope George Lucas would be in terms of coming to grips with something that they didn't enjoy being a part of, Donny Marie show for Donny Osmond, but then later coming to grips that it was okay to be okay and embrace that.
Yeah, that's exactly what we wanted to do. So I'm glad it worked out.
You nailed it.
Here's the way. Yeah, here's the way.
I'm usually not that deep, so for me to.
Yeah. No, Donny was one of those people we interviewed, and it was just so refreshing to have him be like just cool about it. He's like, yeah, it exists. I don't like it, but like it is what it is. I mean, it's the way it was during that time. I kind of came with this idea where it's like if you look at the Star Wars Holiday Special as like I don't know the 8th or 9th grade yearbook of Star Wars. No one's cool in middle school. Like no one's like looks great, and it's kind of like you're embarrassed about it, but like we don't burn our yearbooks, pretend like they don't exist. Like we usually kind of look at it and be like, oh look, what I was wearing was ridiculous, or what I thought was cool was, man, the times have changed and I just didn't know better. And like it's kind of like this Star Wars adolescence where they didn't know what Star Wars was yet during this weird time, so it was just going with what, like, I wore Z Cavarici pants in like 5th or 6th grade, if that means anything, or like the big puffy hammer pants,
kamikaze shirts.
Yeah, it was just like, and like fortunately, there's not a whole lot of photos floating around, but like, yeah, like I'm not proud of that, but I'm not going to pretend like I didn't do it.
I had Cavarici pants too.
Yeah, they were like, I can't believe my parents, it was like $100 back in like 89 or whenever it was. And I'm just like, I was like a fat kid too. So it's like, they weren't actually flattering. It was just, I don't know, it was not a good look. Yeah, and they all had like a million pleats at the front.
I know. They were quite the fashion statement. The other awesome thing that I loved in it was Jon Favreau talking about how that Boba Fett cartoon from the Star Wars Holiday Special influenced The Mandalorian. I will say, I remember watching The Mandalorian going, oh, that's the same disintegration weapon from the cartoon. And in my head, I was like, oh, I bet that's where they got it. Having no idea. So it was nice to hear him say that. And like him referencing Life Day and, in one episode, it was really cool that for something that's so forgotten and underground, like how it's still part of culture.
Well, I can't remember how old Favreau was at the time, but he was somewhere around like 8 or 10. So like, it's funny that like Dave Filoni and him, or like people like that, are now making Star Wars content because they're going to pull from what they grew up with. So they have especially like a soft spot in their heart for the Star Wars Holiday Special because like they were the exact demographic when they made it. And I love that clip too because it's like, so on my camera, someone basically asked George Lucas about the Star Wars Holiday Special, and you can tell he's not totally thrilled to be talking about it. And that was from like the extras on Mandalorian, some like series. And I remember I found that, I'm like, oh, that has to go in the movie.
When you were putting together a documentary, like when you start interviewing Lenny and Bruce, then when you're creating a documentary, do you then kind of just start to form the arc? I remember like I was talking to, can't remember which comedian I was talking to there, but we were talking about The Aristocrats, the movie. And they were talking about like when they filmed George Carlin, that's when they knew they had the movie. Paul Provenza I was talking to. And that's when they knew they had the movie because everything he gave, and then they could start to create structure around that. So Lenny Ripp sort of gave you the out, but then what was your hopes? What was like the journey you hope the person who maybe has never seen the holiday special, but is going to watch this documentary out of curiosity because they're a current Star Wars fan? What were you hoping to have someone walk away with?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the biggest goal was to create a time capsule of what 1978 was like at that time in the TV world. Like, that was kind of, because, like, I wasn't familiar with that. And, like, most people I know aren't, it's just, we weren't old enough at the time to really know. So to create that kind of world and give a sense, to me, that really opened the film up to a broader audience. Just from a pop culture standpoint, the Star Wars Holiday Special is like a hook for people, but to pull them in, I mean, like Napoleon, this is a thing I thought was strictly for Star Wars fans. It's crossed over to a number of people that I thought in a million years would like this, because like I've had people who are adamantly dislike Star Wars or just are indifferent, but they love revisiting this time period because they remember what the 70s was like. And because we kind of opened the film up where it's like, also another thing I want to do is Charlie Lippincott is kind of this unsung hero of Star Wars from the marketing perspective. And I felt this was a way to kind of tell his story that he doesn't get the credit I feel he's due. And I feel this is a way to kind of give him the credit because he was part of this whole marketing. The marketing he did kind of led to the holiday special, but he's also responsible for Star Wars being as successful as it is. So, I mean, that was a big piece, but after that first half hour, it's kind of just going into the highlights of the holiday special and getting some backstory. Like, kind of that ends more of a traditional doc, but the first half hour is where we really spent a lot of time molding it to kind of appeal to a broader audience. And also, I mean, I think there's a lot of people who just don't know. They think the Star Wars came out and was just like, by some miracle, like a lottery ticket, was just successful, and they don't know how much work and legwork went into to actually make it successful.
Who made the poster? Because I got to tell you, the poster for this movie is unbelievable.
No. It's Danny Tinarelli. She is, you can buy it on Etsy. There's a link on our website. That was designed before we made the movie. And we interview her at the end. She's the one that's holding the poster up, talking about commercials over the credits. But we told her, we're like, can we use your poster? And she's just like, yeah, have at it. And I'm like, well, what do you want for it? She's like, oh, whatever you want to pay me, it's fine. And just like, she's super cool about it. Yeah, I mean, it's a full on fan made poster that probably pre-existed us making this by at least a couple of years, but it's perfect. It's exactly the kind of look we want. And we're really fortunate to have it.
You can look at that and it really captures the Star Wars holiday special in a poster.
Yeah.
It was...
No, it's fun. There's a really cool Japanese one that fan made, but it's not as... This one fits better to give an idea of what the special is.
You do the award circuit then? What's the... I know anyone listening, you can get this on demand on Google Play and Vudu and Prime Video, Apple TV. You can buy a Blu-ray or buy the DVD at disturbanceintheforce.com. You can head over there and buy all that. What was your marketing plan inspired by the Star Wars genius that you were showcasing to get?
I don't know. It's totally grassroots. I mean, we did the festival circuit to build reviews. We premiered at South by Southwest, and we've been fortunate to play at some really prime film festivals. But a lot of it's just organic and fan support. So we've Richard Roper did an interview, a review of it that was super nice, but it was just kind of hey, you should check out our movie. Are you willing to, and he's just yeah, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I'll check it out. But it's just kind of it's that and just kind of organic growth. But the thing that's amazing, I never in a million years thought if I did a documentary on the Star Wars holiday special, it would be the best reviewed movie of anything I've been involved with. We're certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes with 100%. And I'm I thought for sure we're going to get some people that are just why would anyone care about this, and just dismiss it? And that hasn't, there's still time for it to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. But it's just, I feel the fan support has just really been behind us to make it, but we don't have anything formally organized. We haven't spent hardly any money on actual ads or marketing. It's just all organic. Charlie Lick would probably be disappointed in our marketing approach. We actually got the lottery ticket, but we didn't.
Besides people that maybe reached out or interviewed, is anyone in the Star Wars universe contacted you or your crew in any way and said, oh, this is awesome?
Yeah, I mean, so Mark Hamill watched the movie, really liked it. We got really close to interviewing him, but I feel at the end of the day, he's just kind of promised Lucas that this is not something that, it's weird because he'll talk about it, he's on Archive talking about it, but he doesn't want to do a formal sit down interview, because it came down to I'll interview, but I can't talk at all about the Star Wars holiday special. And I'm well, that's going to be difficult, I think, to do an interview to talk around it. And then
for a documentary on that movie or that show.
Yeah, it was just kind of let's just let it go. I mean, I kind of prefer having the cast talk in the archival because it kind of feels more, it feels more truthful and real to me, as opposed to someone knowing that they're going to have to talk about this and then coming up with something. Yeah, and then we've had some people that actually work at Lucasfilm that love the movie, which is funny if it ever kind of trickles up to the higher ups there, because we approached them early on, and went all the way to the top. And like the answer we got back was that it's too soon for Lucasfilm to be directly involved in a Star Wars holiday special documentary.
Too soon?
Which I've always just like, I read into that as like, as long as George Lucas is alive, maybe it's an off-limits topic. But I also feel like, I actually don't think Lucas cares at this point. Like he doesn't enjoy talking about it. It's not like it keeps him up at night or like he gives it two thoughts. You get with the quote in the movie where he talks about like, look, he's like, I've spent more time talking about the holiday special than I ever did working on it. And I kind of feel that to some degree that's true.
Well, at least the folks around him, like in The Mandalorian, are embracing pieces of it. Though they are embracing the one piece that is, maybe he was just upset that Life Day never caught on like Festivus.
Well, it has caught on now, so he got his wish. I mean, here's the other thing. Disney's marketing, it's like a Life Day Wookiee, says Life Day on it. Yeah, but they have like Life Day merchandise at parks. So, I mean, they are embracing it to some degree. And like you said, it's on like the animated segments on Disney Plus. So they're slowly embracing it as long as they can make money on it.
That's always the key. So what's Jeremy, what's next for you? What's your next project?
So I mainly I don't direct terribly often, but like the next movie I'm producing is a documentary on the comedian Gallagher. We've been working on it for about 3 years. It's not what people are going to expect, but it's super interesting. Like he lived a very unique life. He's more complicated than I think people give him credit for.
Didn't he have a whole thing where like his brother kind of took his act, Gallagher too? And
yep, we found his brother. We've talked to, It's an interesting story. Yeah, he had his brother like do his act, but the idea was going to be like Gallagher too, and then the idea was supposed to compete with Carrot Top because his manager became Carrot Top's manager. And like we interviewed Carrot Top a couple of months ago, and we're hoping to have that done probably at the start of festival circuit, maybe later this year.
Very cool. Yeah. Well, congratulations on a Disturbance in the Force. How the Star Wars Holiday Special happened. It's amazing. I really loved it. I really did.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
It was one of those where I think when I originally reached out to you, all it was, it hadn't come out yet. And so I was excited just by the idea of it. And you lived up to it 1,000%. 1,000%. It was probably,
well, thanks.
Yeah, it was so good. I encourage everybody to go watch this documentary. So I'll put links in the show notes.
Well, awesome, man. I really appreciate it.
Jeremy, thanks for hanging out with me and sharing some of these stories. I appreciate it. Appreciate you. Thanks.
We'll see you. It was fun. Take care.
All right. How fun was Jeremy Coon? Oh my gosh. Napoleon Dynamite and A Disturbance in the Force. If you haven't seen A Disturbance in the Force, I highly recommend it. It's an amazing documentary. If you haven't watched Napoleon Dynamite recently, time to watch it and celebrate its 20th anniversary. I actually was just at the Motor City Comic Con, and Ephraim Ramirez, Pedro, I ran his panel. So I got to hang out with him for a while, and he shared a ton of great stories from Napoleon Dynamite. That was super fun. So can't believe it. I mean, the interview's over. We're at the end of another episode. How did these fly by? I know. One more huge thank you to Jeremy Coon. I sent him a million emails and he finally gave in and came on the show. And of course, a huge thank you to all of you for coming back week after week. It means the world to me, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Classic Conversations. If you like what you heard, don't be shy and give us a follow on your favorite podcast app. Also, why not go ahead and tell all your friends about the show? You strike us as the kind of person that people listen to. Thanks in advance for spreading the word, and we'll catch you next time on Classic Conversations.